remember the quiet hum of the ceiling light in that dressing room more than anything else. It flickered softly above my head while the rest of the resort buzzed with the kind of joy that never quite reached me. My name is Jenna Rhodes. I was 31 years old on the morning I married the man I loved. I was standing in a room full of silk and flowers and mirrors, and yet all I could think about was the strange heaviness in my chest, the kind that only shows up when the past refuses to stay where it should. The makeup artist had just left, and the world felt unusually still. I could hear laughter out in the courtyard, the clinking of glasses, a soft breeze pushing through the open windows, carrying the smell of pine from the lake beyond. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like something was warning me to pay attention. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. What are you doing while listening to this story? For me, at the moment everything happened, I was standing barefoot in that dressing room, holding my bouquet like it was the only steady thing in my hands. If you want, tell me what you were doing when the story began. I love knowing where people are joining me from because moments like these feel different for everyone. A knock came on the door. Not the gentle kind. The sharp, impatient rhythm I had known all my life. My mom stepped inside without waiting for an answer. She looked elegant as always, her blonde hair pinned perfectly, her pearl earrings matching the cool tone of her dress. She smiled in that way she always did, the smile that never warmed her eyes. She brushed imaginary dust from my shoulder and said I looked lovely. I nodded, trying to let her touch sit comfortably on my skin. It never did. I spent my entire adult life chasing the kind of approval that never really came. She adjusted my veil and stepped back. Her eyes scanned me as if she were checking inventory instead of looking at her daughter. Then she told me Dad was waiting outside with a change to the ceremony schedule. She said it lightly, but there was a tension underneath, a stiffness in her jaw that meant something was brewing. When she left, I breathed out slowly. My pulse finally began to settle, but only for a moment. A few minutes passed before I decided to peek out toward the balcony where my family gathered. And that was when I saw it. Dad leaned down to whisper something into my sister Sarah's ear. Sarah was 3 years older than me and had always been the quiet one, the obedient one. She stood frozen while Dad spoke close to her cheek. I could not hear the words, but I saw the look on Dad's face. Firm, focused, impatient. Then I saw Sarah nod. Not a small nod, a full surrender. She turned away and hurried toward the hallway, keeping her head down as she moved past a group of guests. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what he had told her. David wanted her to go after what he believed was his, the thing I had taken from the house 6 months earlier, the tiny, dark USB that had been sitting in his unlocked safe. The USB I had not told a single person about, not even the man I was about to marry. I stepped back from the doorway before anyone could see me. My hands were trembling. I pressed them into the folds of my dress to hide the shaking. I tried to calm myself. I told myself no one knew where I kept it. No one except me. I had moved it the night before, storing it somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere that felt safe. I had done exactly what I needed to do, but fear has a way of making logic feel small. A bridesmaid bustled in and out with last-minute details, but the room felt like it had begun shrinking around me. I could not stop picturing Dad's whisper. The urgency in his posture, the determination in Sarah's eyes, even as they filled with something close to dread. 10 minutes passed, maybe 12. My heart pounded so loud, I almost did not hear the commotion outside the dressing room door. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered something low, and then the door opened slowly. Sarah stepped inside. Her face was the color of the veil in my hands. Her shoulders were stiff, her breath thin and shaky. She did not look at me at first. She looked past me as if the room behind me might offer an escape. Then Dad appeared behind her, moving fast, almost too fast for a man his age. His voice was low but sharp when he asked her if she had done exactly what he had instructed. Sarah swallowed. Her eyes flicked to mine for a brief second, just long enough for me to see the fear in them. Then she shook her head. Her voice came out thin and broken. It is gone. I did not blink. I did not breathe. Dad stared at her in disbelief, and something inside him seemed to crack. His face was drained of color. My mom rushed over, asking what was wrong, but he did not answer her. He just stood there, frozen, like the world had stopped rotating, and he was the only person left standing in it. Sarah stepped back until her shoulders hit the wall. She did not speak again. I realized then that whatever they thought they would find, whatever they expected her to retrieve, they believed it was still under my control. They believed I was still the same Jenna who could be maneuvered into silence, but I was not that girl anymore. Guests began whispering outside. Music started lightly on the speakers. The ceremony coordinator poked her head in to say the wedding party needed to line up at the top of the stairs. Everything was moving forward around me, even while my family stood in the doorway, unraveling behind me. I straightened my veil with a calm that did not match my racing thoughts. I was about to walk down the aisle with the weight of 6 months of secrets sitting quietly in my chest, and I knew before the day ended, every truth I had been forced to carry would finally have to surface. What none of them knew, not yet, was that I had already chosen my moment, and that moment was coming next. I walked out of that dressing room with my veil settled against my shoulders, and the feeling that every step I took was pulling me deeper into a truth I could not ignore anymore. People smiled as I passed. Someone touched my arm and said I looked beautiful. Someone else laughed softly and said it was a perfect day for a new beginning. I nodded to all of them, but inside my chest, something tightened with every breath. I reached the top of the staircase leading to the courtyard. The music drifted up slowly and warm. The air carried the smell of cut grass and lake water. For a moment, I wondered if everything would feel different if I had never opened that safe 6 months earlier. If I had never taken that small black USB that turned my whole world inside out. The memory rose so quickly, it felt like stepping backward in time. It was late afternoon in early spring. I had shown up at my parents' house to pick up a box of old cookbooks my mom wanted to donate. She had insisted they were in the basement storage closet, even though I had never seen any cookbooks down there before. I went down the narrow wooden steps, the kind that creaked even when you were standing still. The basement smelled like cold concrete and cardboard and something faintly metallic. The storage closet sat half open. I reached for the light switch, but the bulb overhead barely glowed. Stacks of old holiday decorations lined the left wall. On the right side sat a safe I had never noticed before. It was tucked behind a crate of paint cans and a folded ladder. The door of the safe was not fully closed. It rested slightly ajar, like someone had been in a hurry, or had been. Interrupted. I remember crouching down and placing my hand on the door. It swung open, with almost no resistance. Inside were 2 manila envelopes, a passport that did not look familiar, and the small black USB sitting on top like someone had tossed it in at the last second. I reached in without thinking, just trying to see what was inside those envelopes. Instead, my fingers landed on the USB. Before I could look at anything else, I heard my dad's voice calling from upstairs. The sound jolted me so hard, I dropped the envelopes back inside the safe. I heard him walking toward the basement door. For one brief second, I thought I should leave everything exactly as it was. Then something cold and instinctive moved through me. I closed my hand over the USB and slipped it into the pocket of my jacket. Dad called again. I shut the safe and pushed the paint cans forward so it looked undisturbed. When he opened the basement door and looked down at me, his face held a strange tightness. He asked if I had found the cookbooks. I said yes, even though I had never touched them. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to see something behind my eyes. My heart pounded so loud, I thought the walls might echo it. Later that night, I could not sleep. I sat on my couch with the USB resting on my coffee table. My apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of a car passing outside. I stared at the little black rectangle for a long time before I finally picked it up and plugged it into my laptop. I expected spreadsheets or legal documents that made no sense to me. Instead, I found something worse. My name, repeated again and again, on property files, on tax forms, on trust documents I had never heard of. Half of the files were blurry scans of signatures that were supposed to be mine, but were not. I knew my handwriting. I knew my own name. These were not mine. My hands went numb as I scrolled through the folders. Some accounts showed balances I could not even process, numbers with too many zeros. I shut the laptop and pressed my palms into my eyes until the room blurred. Nothing made sense. Why would my name be on any of this? I did not tell Ethan. I did not tell Sarah. I barely understood what I had seen, and some part of me believed that if I said it out loud, the ground would open up under me. The next morning, I planned to forget about it. I really did. I went to work and tried to pretend I had dreamed the whole thing. But around 9 in the morning, an email appeared in my inbox from an address I did not recognize. No greeting, no explanation, just a sentence that made my breath stop in my throat. Do not give it back. It will protect you. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Whoever sent it knew I had the USB. They knew what was on it, and they knew my dad wanted it back. I closed my laptop slowly, terrified someone might hear my thoughts if I moved too fast. I remember pressing my hands against my desk and feeling the cold laminate under my palms. For the first time in my life, I felt truly exposed. Footsteps shuffled behind me on the staircase, and the memory slipped away. The wedding coordinator approached and touched my elbow gently. She told me it was time. Guests were already seated. Ethan was waiting at the end of the aisle. I forced a breath into my lungs and pushed the memory down. There would be time later to unravel every piece of what had led to this moment. Right now, I needed to put one foot in front of the other and walk into a day that was supposed to be beautiful. Except I knew the truth. Beauty had nothing to do with what was coming. I stepped toward the stairs, gripping the rails so tightly my fingers ached, and let the music pull me forward. The music pulled me forward, but my mind did what it always did when I was under pressure. It slipped backward. As I started down the stairs, one careful step at a time, my hand steadying on the rail, old memories rose up like ghosts at the edge of my vision. I had spent my whole life walking toward what my parents wanted and away from what my instincts tried to tell me. That day was no different. At least, not yet. I remembered the first time my name got attached to something that did not belong to me. I was 22, living in a tiny apartment with mismatched furniture and a leaky faucet in Tacoma. I got a call on a Tuesday afternoon from a bank I did not use. The woman on the phone said there was a past due balance on a credit card tied to my social security number. I laughed at first and told her she must have met the wrong person. After work, I drove straight to my parents' house, with my stomach in knots. I sat at their kitchen table while my dad looked over the paper the bank had mailed. His eyes moved quickly, too quickly, like he already knew what he was seeing. He told me it was probably some clerical error. He said identity theft happened all the time now, that it was not a big deal if we caught it early. That word sounded good at the moment. He got on the phone, spoke to someone in a tone that was both charming and hard. When he hung up, he told me he would take care of it, that there was nothing for me to worry about. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Not long after that, when I was about 28, I got a letter from the Internal Revenue Service. They wanted to review a return I had filed 2 years earlier. It said there were inconsistencies in reported income and some missing forms tied to investment accounts I did not know existed. I remember sitting at my small dining table with that letter in my hand, feeling like I had been caught cheating on a test I had never taken. My hands got clammy, my vision blurry at the edges. Once again, I went to my dad. He read the letter, made a face like he was inconvenienced, not surprised. He asked calmly if I had made any investments without telling him. I said no. My finances were simple. My salary, my rent, my car payment, a little savings. That was it. He sighed and said, big institutions made mistakes all the time. He said he knew people who could straighten it out. He took the letter from my hand and said something about how this was what dads were for. The next week, he told me it had been fixed. The letter and the fear that came with it disappeared into his office, along with a lot of other things I was never allowed to see. If I had been older then, or less desperate for him to think I was responsible and smart, maybe I would have asked more questions. Instead, I let his confidence drown out every alarm bell in my head. As I reached the middle landing of the staircase, my dress swishing softly around my ankles, I thought about Sarah. When we were kids, She used to stand between me and my dad when he was angry. When we became adults, she started standing beside him instead. I did not understand when that shift happened. All I knew was that at some point, my dad stopped trying to force me into his plans and started using her instead. There was one night, about a year before the wedding, when I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. I let myself in with the old key they still allowed me to keep for emergencies. The house was quiet except for low voices coming from the office. The door was not fully closed. I saw my dad at his desk, files spread out in front of him. Sarah sat in the chair across from him, shoulders hunched. He pushed a stack of papers toward her and told her to sign them. I could not hear every word, but the ones that drifted out were sharp enough. Time. Deadline. Do you want me to fix this or not? Sarah's hand shook as she held the pen. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then she signed, page after page. She never asked what she was putting her name on. Later that night, she texted me something short. She said she wished things were different. When I called to ask what she meant, she brushed it off and said she was just tired. Looking back, I knew those documents and mine were probably cousins. Same ink, same lies, same man pushing them across a desk. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The ceremony coordinator smiled too brightly and gestured toward the open doors. I could see the rows of white chairs, the flicker of candles on the aisle. Ethan standing at the archway in his navy suit, the lake behind him glinting under the afternoon light. He looked handsome and steady, and completely unaware that the ground under us was already cracked. My chest tightened in a different way then. This was not just about my parents and their secrets. Ethan had never asked for any of this. He came from a quiet family in Oregon, people who raise their kids with backyard barbecues and carport projects, instead of silent expectations and financial leverage. The worst thing his dad ever did to him was make him mow the lawn in the rain when he missed curfew. I thought about the first time Ethan noticed something was off. It was about 2 months before the wedding. I had gotten a thick envelope in the mail from a law firm I did not recognize. It contained a notice about a trust in my name. The language was dense and careful, but the message was clear. I was listed as beneficiary on something that involved property and accounts I had never touched. I sat on the couch with the papers in my lap when Ethan came in from the kitchen. He read my face before he read the letter. He asked what was wrong. I handed him the stack. He flipped through the pages slowly, his brow furrowed deeper with each page. When he finished, he asked me, very gently, if I had known about any of it. I shook my head. He said it did not make sense, and that we should talk to someone who understood these things. A lawyer, a financial advisor, anyone who did not share my last name. I wanted to say yes. Instead, I heard my dad's voice in my head, the one that said, some things are family business, not for strangers. I heard my mom's voice that always followed close behind, and we should not embarrass ourselves in front of other people. So I told Ethan maybe it was just some old plan my dad forgot to mention, some trust he had set up years ago and never updated. I told him I would ask my dad. It sounded reasonable enough out loud that Ethan let it go at that moment, but not completely. A few days later, I went to see my parents for dinner. We sat at their long dining table, under the chandelier that never quite lit the corners of the room. At some point between the salad and the roast, I mentioned the letter about the trust. My dad did not flinch. He said he had started something years ago to protect me, that it was complicated and above my head, and that he would handle the paperwork. He said I did not need to worry. That word again. Then he asked if I had anything at my place that belonged to him. Documents. Drives. Things I might have picked up by mistake. He kept his tone casual, but his eyes were fixed on me in a way that made my skin prickle. I told him no. He sat back in his chair and smiled like we were talking about the weather. My mom changed the subject to flower arrangements for the wedding. Sarah kept her eyes on her plate. Now, standing at the entrance to my own ceremony, I felt all those moments settling on my shoulders at once. The credit card that was not mine. The audit that vanished when my dad took control. The trust in my name that nobody wanted to explain. The way Sarah's hand shook when she signed things. The way my dad's face had gone pale when Sarah said it was gone. The coordinator touched my arm again, reminding me it was time to walk. The doors were about to open. The guests would rise, the music would swell, I drew in a breath that felt like it came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. If I kept pretending I did not know what I knew, I would be exactly what my dad always wanted me to be. Quiet. Useful. Blind. I straightened my back, wrapped my fingers around the bouquets so they would not shake, and waited for the doors to swing wide. The doors swung open, and a warm rush of air filled with soft music and murmured excitement washed over me. For a heartbeat, the world looked almost normal. Guests stood, turning toward me with smiles and bright eyes. My bouquet felt heavier than it should have as I stepped forward, each footfall slow and measured on the white runner. I kept my chin steady and my breathing even, but inside, everything throbbed with the pressure of all the lies stacked behind me. I walked a few more steps before my vision blurred for a moment, and another. Memory pushed itself forward. The night that convinced me something was deeply wrong. It started with a phone call. Mom had invited me over for dinner on a Thursday evening, claiming she had something she wanted to show me for the wedding. A new place-setting idea, or some decoration she thought matched the color palette better than the one I had chosen. Those calls always came with a tiny twist of criticism, wrapped in sweetness. I said I would stop by after work. When I arrived, the kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. The house was too quiet for dinner to be ready. My mom was in the living room, carefully arranging napkins at the coffee table, like she was staging something. She told me she was waiting for Dad, that he had to finish a call with an associate before dinner. Her voice had that clipped edge that told me she was irritated at him, but wanted me to think everything was fine. I offered to bring the salad bowl in from the kitchen. She waved her hand and said she would handle it. Her eyes kept darting toward the office at the end of the hallway. I could hear Dad speaking inside. His voice was low, sharper than usual, carrying a tone that made the air feel thinner. I pretended to check the time on my phone, then walked casually toward the hallway, as if I were looking for the bathroom. The office door was not fully closed. A strip of light spilled into the hall. David was at his desk, leaning forward, gripping a file folder with both hands. He spoke in that clipped way he used when things were slipping through his fingers. He told the person on the phone that the situation needed to be cleaned up as soon as possible. He said he had a deadline pressing in on him, and that if certain papers were exposed, the entire structure would collapse. He paused, then said he had already taken care of some documents, but there were still pieces out of his reach. My stomach clenched. It was not hard to guess what he meant. Then he said something that froze me in place. He told the person he needed everything pulled back before Jenna did something foolish with any of it. He said my name like it was a puzzle he wanted to break apart. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I thought he might hear it. I stepped back, but the floorboard under my heel let out a small creak. The sound was soft, but Dad stopped mid-sentence. The silence that followed was sharp and dangerous. I slipped quickly into the bathroom before the office door moved and held my breath. After a moment, his voice resumed. Softer. Lower. More controlled, like he was reminding himself who he needed to be in front of me. When I returned to the living room, Mom told me to sit. She smoothed the napkin on her lap and asked if I was feeling all right. Her eyes scanned my face like she was searching for signs of disobedience. Dad entered the room with a practiced smile stretched across his face. He kissed the top of my head and asked how my day had been. I forced myself to answer normally. I knew if I showed any crack, he would see it and ask questions I was not ready to face. Dinner passed in uneasy silence. Mom talked about the guest list, then the florist, then asked if my dress fittings had all been scheduled. She said these things in a cheerful tone, but beneath it, her eyes kept flicking toward Dad, waiting for his cue. Halfway through the meal, Dad asked casually if I had finished going through some old boxes I had taken from the house a few weeks ago. I had not taken any boxes. His gaze was too sharp, too expectant. I said no, and that I did not have time lately because of wedding planning. He nodded slowly, then told me that if I came across anything that looked like it belonged to him, I should bring it by as soon as possible. He said he had misplaced something important and wanted to make sure I had not. Mistakenly picked it up. I felt my heart jump. He never misplaced anything. Not a pen, not a receipt. He was the kind of man who alphabetized his files and color-coded his planner. If he was suddenly searching for something, it meant he already knew exactly what was missing. After dinner, I offered to help clear the table. Mom said no. in a tight voice, as if she did not want me wandering too close to anything. She told me I should get some rest because brides needed their sleep. She touched my arm lightly, but her fingers trembled. Sarah came through the front door just as I picked up my coat. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup smudged slightly, like she had been crying or rubbing her eyes. She stopped when she saw me. She whispered a tired greeting and passed me on her way to the kitchen. When I stepped out onto the porch, I heard Mom's voice behind me saying just loud enough for me to catch that she wished I would trust them more. Dot answered that trust had to be earned and that some people did not understand what loyalty looked like. I walked to my car with my hands shaking. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The air inside the car felt thick and sour, and I knew then that whatever was happening in that house was not a simple misunderstanding or a harmless oversight. I was not a confused daughter overreacting to shadows. Something real and dangerous was shifting under my feet. The morning after that dinner, I found Sarah waiting outside my apartment building. She stood near the steps, her arms wrapped around herself, even though the weather was warm. She said she needed to talk, but her voice wavered so badly I could barely understand her. She told me she was tired. She told me she felt trapped. She told me Dad had asked her to sign things she did not fully understand, and that saying no never felt like an option. I asked what she had signed. She shook her head and said she did not want to talk about it. Then she said something that had been echoing in my mind ever since. She said I did not know the full story, that Dad had ways of handling problems that could ruin a person quietly. She said she wished she could leave, but she did not know how. She left quickly afterward. I watched her drive away with tears in her eyes. Something inside me cracked that day. A thin line of denial I had been holding on to finally snapped. Now, standing at the entrance of my own wedding, I felt the full weight of every memory pressing down on me. The truth was no longer hiding in corners. It was here, breathing against my skin. The doors closed behind me. The aisle stretched ahead like a long white path I had walked toward my entire life. I tightened my grip on the bouquet and took a slow breath, preparing myself for whatever waited on the other side. The music swelled, and I started down the aisle as everyone turned to look at me. The world narrowed into a tunnel of flickering candles and familiar faces. I could hear the faint rustle of people sitting back down, a child whispering to someone, the quiet sniffle of an aunt who always cried at weddings. Ethan was at the far end, standing under the arch wrapped in white flowers, trying to catch my eye with a soft smile that said we were about to start our life together. But my mind refused to stay in that moment. It kept slipping back to Sarah, to all the times she had stood next to me as if we were on the same side, even when deep down I knew she was standing closer to Dad. There was one evening, a few weeks before the wedding, that would not leave my thoughts. It was the night I stopped believing that Sarah was just doing what she was, told without understanding any of it. I had been at my place in Seattle, sitting on the couch with my laptop open and the wedding planner spread across the coffee table. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah asking if she could stop by. That alone was unusual. She was always the one too busy, too scheduled, too worn down to make spontaneous plans. I told her yes and started a pot of coffee, more out of nervous habit than hospitality. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. Her mascara was smudged slightly under her eyes, and her blouse was wrinkled in a way that did not match her usual careful appearance. She dropped her purse by the door and stood there in the entryway like she was, not sure if she should come in. I asked if everything was all right. She gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes and said she just wanted to see how wedding planning was going. Her voice sounded too bright. She walked around the living room, touching little things, a picture frame, a candle, my throw blanket, like she was avoiding something heavier. Eventually, she sat down at the edge of the couch and asked how I was feeling about marrying into Ethan's family. She wanted to know if I was excited to have in-laws who seemed calm and normal. The way she said normally made my chest ache. I told her I was grateful, yes, that being with Ethan's family felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. She nodded slowly and stared at her hands. Then she asked, very carefully, if I ever thought about how different our lives would be if Dad had been born into a regular job, instead of a world of spreadsheets and deals and meetings with people in expensive suits. The question was so strange I did not know how to answer. I shrugged and said I did not know that he had always been who he was. Sarah laughed once, a hard little sound, and said that Dad liked to pretend he carried the family on his shoulders, but really he was just good at getting other people to sign their names on things. For him. That made my heart jump. It was the closest she had ever come to criticizing him out loud. I watched her carefully. I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, then shook her head and said she did not want to get into it. She said she was tired of feeling like the only person who knew what sass behind his polished reputation. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and asked if I had ever wondered why my name kept showing up in places it did not belong. The credit card, the tax mix-up, the trust letter. She said it like she already knew my answer. I froze. I had never told her about the USB. I had never told anyone. I asked her why she was asking me that. Sarah rubbed her temples and said that when Dad felt cornered, he used the people closest to him as shields, that he had done it to her more than once, that he had used her signature on documents that made no sense, on forms she did not fully understand, all in the name of protecting the family. She said he had a way of making you feel like saying no would be the same as betraying everyone you loved. So you signed. And signed, and hoped it would not blow up. I asked if she thought it was going to blow up. She nodded, just once, her eyes filling with tears she did not let fall. She said she felt something coming, like a storm that had been on the radar for years, finally moving overhead. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her into the space I had started to carve out for myself away from Dad's influence. But then she said something that made me take a step back instead. She told me quietly that Dad was worried about some missing pieces. She used those words, missing pieces. She said he thought some things had been misplaced, possibly at my apartment, and that if I found anything that looked like it belonged to him, I should bring it straight to him and not involve anyone else. My lungs tightened. I asked her if she thought he was using my name on things, the way he had used hers. For the first time in our lives, she did not look away. She held my gaze and said yes. Then she added that as long as everything stayed in the family, he could fix it. But if something slipped out, if someone on the outside got hold of the wrong file, the wrong drive, I could hear the echo of his words and hers. Fix it, pull it back, clean it up. Phrases that rolled around our house like they meant something noble instead of something dangerous. I asked her flat out if she was warning me or working for him. Sarah's face crumpled for a second before she smoothed it out. She said she did not know anymore, that she had spent so long standing next to him that she was not sure which thoughts were hers and which ones were his. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to point out that she was a grown woman who still let our dad sign her life away every time he got scared. But I could also see the little girl who used to sneak into my room at night when his footsteps were too loud in the hallway. I told her I did not have anything of his. That was the last lie I told her. As she left, she stood in the doorway for a moment and said she hoped I knew what I was doing. She said Dad would not let go of anything he believed belonged to him without a fight. That sentence followed me all the way to my wedding day. Back in the present, I moved slowly down the aisle, each step measured, my dress rustling softly. My eyes scanned the faces on either side as I walked. Aunts, cousins, old family friends, people from Ethan's office. And there, near the front row on my side, sat Sarah. She was already back from whatever search Dad had sent her on. Her posture was too straight. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. When our eyes met, something flickered across her face. Guilt. Fear. Maybe both. Behind her, Dad sat stiffly in his chair, jaw clenched, hands folded together too tightly. Mom had that frozen half-smile plastered on her face, the one she used at charity events when she was bored but wanted people to. Think she was thrilled to be there. For a moment, as I reached the halfway point of the aisle, the image of the three of them sitting there almost made me laugh. They looked like a painting of a perfect family, except I knew every crack in the frame. I forced myself to keep moving, to keep breathing, even as my pulse hammered in my ears. By the time I reached the front row, I could feel Dad's gaze burning into me. I did not look at him. I could not. If I did, I might lose the tiny bit of control I had managed to hold on to. Instead, I focused on Ethan waiting for me under the arch, and on the knowledge that while my family believed they were still 2 steps ahead, the truth had already started to shift quietly into my hands. I kept my eyes on Ethan as I reached him under the arch, but my mind was still tangled in all the things that had happened before I walked down that aisle. The music softened and faded into the background while the officiant greeted us with a warm smile. I tried to steady my breathing, but the air around me felt charged in a way that made the hairs on my arms lift. Ethan squeezed my hand and whispered that I looked beautiful. I nodded, trying to let his voice settle the storm inside me. But the weight of what I carried pressed against my ribs. The officiant began speaking, something about love and partnership and shared futures, but my attention drifted sideways. I could feel Dad's eyes fixed on me, like he was trying to read my thoughts, from across the rows of chairs. Mom sat stiff and unmoving beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. And then there was Sarah, sitting between them, her body too still, her gaze fixed on something invisible on the ground. I wondered if she was thinking about the missing drive, if she was replaying the moment she slipped out of the reception room earlier, doing exactly what Dad whispered for her to do, only to return pale and trembling. I could still see her lips forming those words. It was gone. I wondered if she was afraid I knew more than I had ever let on. Ethan's hand tightened around mine again, and I forced myself to return to the present. The officiant asked him to share his vows first. He pulled a small folded card from his pocket and held it with one hand, looking at me the whole time as he spoke. His voice was steady and sincere, promising partnership and patience, and a home built on truth. Every word felt like a reminder of the line between the life I wanted and the life I was trying to escape. When it was my turn, I reached into the lace pocket sewn into my dress. My vows were written on a thin piece of ivory paper. For a moment, my fingers shook, and the paper nearly slipped from my hand. I took a deep breath and lifted my eyes to Ethan. His face softened, and a warmth spread across my chest that made it just a little easier to speak. I read the first few lines clearly, each word grounding me, and then I felt it. That prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The unmistakable feeling of being watched too closely. I forced myself to continue, but in the corner of my vision I saw movement. Sarah had leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees, her eyes fixed on me with an expression I could not read. Fear, guilt, maybe even warning. I finished reading my vows and folded the paper carefully. The officiant smiled and moved on to the next part, but the strange tension in the air thickened like fog settling over a field. Then, one small sound snapped through the quiet. The delicate chime of my phone vibrating in the small, hidden pocket on the daughter, inside of my gown. My heart jumped. Guests shifted lightly in their seats, unaware. Ethan did not hear it. The officiant kept speaking, but I felt the vibration pulse again, then a third time with a long, continuous buzz. Something cold moved through me. Only one person in my life ever called 3 times in a row when it mattered. Detective Ray Daniels, the only person, outside of myself, who knew part of the truth. I kept my face perfectly still. The officiant asked for the rings and Ethan handed them to him. The ceremony continued, slow and steady, as if the air around us had not changed. But every vibration in my dress echoed like a drumbeat in my spine. When the officiant asked me to place the ring on Ethan's finger, I did it automatically. When he said the words about commitment and faithfulness, I nodded at the right moments. But all I could think was something was wrong. Very wrong. The phone stayed silent after that third vibration, but the damage had already settled in my chest. The rest of the ceremony moved forward like a dream I was not fully inside. I heard people clapping. I felt Ethan lift my veil. I leaned forward as he kissed me. Cameras flashed and bridesmaids cheered softly. All the pieces of a perfect wedding shifted into place around me like they belonged to someone else. As we walked back up the aisle together, friends and family tossing flower petals in the air, I scanned the rows again. Dad had not moved. His expression was tight and unreadable. Mom clapped politely, but her eyes did not reach me. Sarah kept her gaze down, her shoulders slightly hunched, like she was trying to make herself smaller. At the edge of the crowd, tucked near a column wrapped in greenery, stood a figure I had not expected to see at all. He was out of place in a dark suit, his hands clasped in front of him. It was Officer Daniels. He gave a brief nod, not smiling, and the air left my lungs. I tried not to react. No one else seemed to notice him. He stayed near the back, patient and still, waiting. Ethan squeezed my arm and leaned in close, asking if I was all right. I nodded and forced a smile, but I could not look away from where Daniels had stood. When I blinked, he was gone. It felt like a warning settling in my bones. Once we reached the reception area, the band started playing softly, and guests mingled around the tables decorated with candles and soft white flowers. Ethan excused himself to greet a few friends near the bar. I slipped away quietly toward the hallway near the restrooms, the only place I could slip my hand inside my gown without drawing attention. My phone screen lit up with a missed call from Officer Daniels, and then another, and another. Beneath them, a single text. Call me right now. It is urgent. My throat tightened as I stared at those words. I typed a quick message asking if everything was all right. Before I could hit send, someone stepped out from the shadowed corner beside me. I looked up and saw Sarah. She was pale again, her hands clasped tightly together. Her breathing was shallow, like she had run to find me. She told me Dad needed to speak to me. She said his voice had changed. She said he looked like he had finally realized the drive would not be found. Her hands trembled as she said the next part. She told me he knew someone had gone to the police. The hallway felt smaller, like the walls were inching inward. I heard the faint music from the reception room and the clinking of glasses, but everything else faded. I asked her how he found out. Sarah looked at me with a kind of broken sadness I had never seen from her before. She said Dad had been watching for signs, waiting for a change in the air, and when he saw the way I held myself during the ceremony, he finally understood. I stood frozen in that quiet hallway, my phone glowing dimly in my hand, with the message from Officer Daniels still waiting. Call me right now. It is urgent. Before I could respond, the door at the far end of the hallway opened. I saw Dad step inside, closing it behind him softly. His face was calm in a way that scared me more than anger ever could. Sarah whispered that she was sorry. Then she stepped away from me. Dad started walking toward me. Everything inside me went cold. The hallway was silent, except for the sound of his steady footsteps. My back pressed lightly against the wall without me realizing it. The lace of my gown scratched my skin as I tried to keep my breathing from betraying the panic rising in my chest. Dad moved slowly, the way someone does when they want to give you time to understand you cannot escape. He stopped a few feet from me. His face was calm, too calm, the same practiced expression he used when he wanted to seem reasonable while tightening the leash around someone. His eyes stayed locked on mine. I could feel the weight of every year I had spent trying to earn even a sliver of approval from this man. Now I felt only fear mixed with something sharper and colder. He told me we needed to have a conversation. His voice was soft and controlled, like he was speaking to a child who had disobeyed. The sound of it scraped at something deep in me. I folded my hands together, forcing myself not to shake. I asked him what he wanted. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the faint warmth of his breath. I fought the instinct to recoil. He told me he knew someone had spoken to the police. He said it like it was a fact carved into stone. He lifted his chin slightly and told me it had been very disappointing to hear. He did not accuse me directly. He did not have to. His eyes did it for him. I said nothing. The silence stretched between us like a rope he was pulling tight. I could feel Sarah standing behind him, not moving, barely breathing. I remembered her saying she was sorry. I did not know if she meant sorry for him or sorry for me. Adam asked if I had anything I wanted to share. The question sounded gentle, but the threat beneath it pulsed like a bruise. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it between my fingers. I kept my mouth closed. I stared at him and waited. His expression shifted, only slightly, a tightening around his eyes. He lifted one hand and brushed a speck of lint from his suit coat. He spoke again, telling me he had spent his life protecting this family. He said all the success we enjoyed had been earned through his sacrifices. He paused, letting those words sink in. Then he said he expected loyalty in return. I felt something inside me harden. Not anger, not fear. Something colder. Something that had been building for years without a name. I lifted my chin a little. Dad noticed. His lips pressed together, and I saw a flicker of something like disbelief. He leaned in closer, placing one hand against the wall near my shoulder. His voice dropped. He told me that people who turned on their own family always regretted it. He told me outsiders would never protect me the way he could. He said the world was full of traps I did not understand. His tone made it sound like he was offering protection, but I could feel the threat woven into every word. I pushed myself away from the wall and straightened my back. He watched me carefully, as if waiting for me to break. But I did not break. I looked at him and asked what exactly he thought had been given to the police. I said it calmly, meeting his eyes without blinking. His jaw tightened. He told me he knew information had been shared, even if the details were not yet clear. He said it had been a mistake. He said mistakes could be fixed, but not if I kept choosing the wrong people to confide in. He glanced toward the reception room, toward Ethan. The implications stung. I told him quietly that I had not chosen the wrong person. His eyes darkened at that. For the first time, I saw real fear crack through his confidence. He tried to mask it, but it was there, a faint tremor in the corner of his mouth, a slight shake in the hand near the wall. Sarah stepped forward then, her voice trembling as she asked Dad to stop. He did not turn to look at her. He told her to go back to the reception and enjoy the evening. His tone made it clear she was no longer part of this conversation. Sarah hesitated, her hands twisting together. Then she moved backward slowly, until her shoulder touched the wall near hallway entrance. She stayed there, too afraid to leave, too afraid to intervene. Dad turned back to me. He asked if there was anything I wanted to return to him, anything that had been misplaced, anything that did not belong in my hands. I knew what he meant. The drive, the evidence, the truth he had tried so hard to bury. My fingers brushed against the inside of my gown where the pocket rested. The faint outline of my phone brushed against my skin. I thought of the missed calls from Officer Daniels. I thought of the urgency in his voice when he had spoken to me earlier. I thought of the documents I had already handed over. The copies are safely out of my reach. And his fear made sense. He could not control what was no longer in the house, what was no longer in the family. I looked at him and said I did not have anything that belonged to him. The lie felt like stepping off a cliff and choosing to trust the fall. God studied me for a long, silent moment. His eyes searched my face as if he could claw the truth out of me by force, but I did not look away. Then, for the first time in my life, I watched my dad fail to read me. He stepped back slightly. His breath hitched, just barely. It would have been invisible to anyone who did not know him as well as I did. He closed his eyes slowly and opened them again with a calmer expression. Too calm. A controlled calm that meant he had made a decision he did not want to speak aloud. He told me to remember that every action has a consequence. His voice was quiet, steady, devoid of heat. He said it the way someone says the sky is blue, a simple fact. He stepped back once more, straightened his coat, and told me we would talk again later. Then he walked past me, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air long after his footsteps disappeared. Sarah exhaled shakily. She moved toward me, her hands wringing together, her face pale. She asked if I was all right. I nodded, though the ground felt unsteady under my feet. She said Dad had not looked like himself, that something in him had shifted. I told her I knew. The hallway suddenly felt too quiet. The music from the reception drifted through the door, soft and distant. Laughter echoed faintly from the guests outside. It felt unreal, like the world continued spinning, even though something deep within it had cracked. I told Sarah I needed a moment alone. She hesitated, then nodded. She walked back toward the reception, her steps unsteady. When she was gone, I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. The air felt cold against my skin. I touched the inside of my gown again, feeling the faint weight of my phone. I needed to call Officer Daniels. I needed to know what had happened, but my fingers felt numb. I pushed myself upright and took a slow breath, then another. I walked toward the side door of the venue, away from the guests and the music, needing air, space, anything that would let me think. When I stepped outside, the evening breeze brushed against my face. It should have been calming. But beneath the wind, I could feel it. The change, the shift, the certainty that Dad would not let this go. I reached for my phone. Before I could unlock it, the screen lit up with a new notification. It was from Officer Daniels. "We need to talk. Now." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I tightened my grip on the phone and started walking toward the parking lot, every step echoing with the knowledge that nothing about tonight would end. Quietly. The music from the reception softened behind me as the door swung closed, leaving only the sound of my heels on the concrete path and the faint rush of traffic from the road beyond the resort gates. The evening air was cooler now, and I could feel goosebumps rise along my arms under the thin fabric of my dress. I reached a darker corner of the lot and finally stopped. The overhead lights buzzed softly, casting long shadows between the parked cars. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my phone and called the last number that had appeared on my screen. It rang once, twice, then connected. I lifted it to my ear and listened to the familiar low voice on the other end. Officer Daniels asked quietly if I was somewhere I could talk. I told him I had stepped outside, that I was alone for the moment. I could hear some kind of background noise around him. Phones ringing, distant voices, the hum of a busy room. It made the quiet parking lot feel even more surreal. He said they had moved faster than expected. He told me new information had come in, tying several suspicious accounts directly to my name, and that timing mattered now. He asked again if I felt safe. I told him my dad had confronted me in a hallway and that I could feel something dangerous settling in him. But for the moment, he had walked away. There was a pause on the line. I could almost picture Daniels rubbing his forehead the way he did when he was thinking. He said they were close to filing official charges and that certain departments were already watching my dad's movements. He told me that when people in his position sensed they were losing control, they often tried drastic measures to protect themselves, sometimes by shifting blame onto the easiest target. I knew what that meant. I was the easiest target. My name was on the paperwork. I was standing in a white dress with everything to lose. My dad had spent years building a story about himself as the protector of the family. It would not be hard for him to reverse that story and make me into the ungrateful daughter who had made reckless decisions with money she did not understand. I asked Daniels what I should do. My voice sounded small in my own ears. He told me not to sign anything, not to agree to any quick fixes or family-managed solutions, and not to let myself be cornered without a way to reach out for help. He said very plainly that if my dad pushed papers in front of me tonight, I needed to stall, leave, or call him back immediately. As he spoke, I glanced across the parking lot. Near the hedge that separated the lot from the side entrance, I saw a dark sedan idling, its headlights off. I watched as a figure stepped out, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the building. I knew that walk. The deliberate steps, the squared shoulders. It was my dad's attorney, a man who had been circling our family dinners for years, always arriving after something serious had happened. My stomach twisted. I told Daniels that the lawyer was here. He exhaled slowly and said that confirmed his suspicions. He told me they would keep their side moving and that I had already done more than most people in my position would ever dare to do. He said I needed to be careful, but also reminded me that I was not alone anymore. Then he told me he would call again if anything shifted in the next hour. We ended the call, and I stood there for a few seconds with the phone still in my hand, listening to the faint ringing in my own ears. The sky above the parking lot had deepened into a dark blue, the first stars just barely visible. It struck me then how strange it was that the universe could look so calm, while my whole life tilted beneath my feet. I tucked the phone back into the hidden pocket in my dress and started walking toward the side entrance. Before I could reach it, the door opened from the inside. My mom stood there, framed by the warm hallway light, her face stretched into a smile that was too tight at the edges. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her, shutting out the noise of the reception. She told me people were asking where I was, and that I should not be gone too long. Her voice sounded practiced, but there was a tremor underneath. She looked toward the lot, then back at me, and said my dad wanted a brief word in the small lounge near the back. She said he only needed a moment, that he wanted to clear the air before we returned to the party. The words "clear the air" made my chest ache. That was what he always called it when he planned to bend someone into the shape he needed. I asked her if the lawyer was here. For a split second, something flickered in her eyes. She said he had stopped by to drop off some paperwork for my dad. Nothing more. I knew she was lying before she finished the sentence. I could have refused. I could have walked past her and gone straight back into the main room, straight to Ethan, straight to the microphone to make a scene big enough that no one could control it. But years of conditioning pulled at me. Years of being told not to embarrass the family, not to make things worse, not to air private matters in public. So I nodded once and followed her inside. The small lounge sat at the far end of a quiet corridor. It had a low ceiling and a single window looking out over a stand of dark trees. The lighting was dim and soft, the kind meant for private conversations and late-night drinks. When we stepped in, my dad was already there, standing near a low table. Beside him, perched on the edge of an armchair, was his attorney. My mom closed the door and stayed near it, her back pressed lightly against the wood, as if she could keep the outside world from slipping in. The air in the room felt thick, the faint smell of cologne and polished leather mixing with my own nerves. My dad gestured toward a chair. I remained standing. My gown rustled as I shifted my weight. He studied me for a moment, then glanced briefly at the attorney. The man nodded almost imperceptibly and opened a leather folder on his lap. He pulled out a slim stack of papers and placed them on the low table. Dad told me they had found a way to protect me. He said there was a path where I could stay untouched by any of the mess, a way to keep my new life with Ethan clean and safe. He said all it would require was a simple agreement on my part, a signature, acknowledging that certain decisions in the past had been mine, alone. My ears rang. My vision narrowed onto that stack of papers. I could imagine the language already, careful and vague, heavy with legal phrases that would twist my life into a shield for his. It would say I had knowingly taken on risk, that I had benefited from funds in ways I did not report, that any confusion in the records was the result of my own misunderstanding. It would pull the weight of his choices down onto my shoulders. I lifted my eyes and looked at him. He watched me with something like patience, but I could see the strain and the tightness at the corners of his mouth. He reminded me that there was a lot at stake. Ethan, my job, any future children I might want to have. He said scandals had a way of haunting families for generations. He said he was trying to spare me that. The attorney added, in a low, measured tone, that the agreement would never need to see a courtroom if everyone cooperated. He said it would sit quietly in a drawer unless needed, as proof that I understood what had happened and accepted responsibility. His voice was smooth, but I heard the threat buried under every word. I thought about the folders in my closet at home and the copies now sitting on some desk in a police station. I thought about the email that had arrived months ago from a stranger warning me to keep the drive. I thought about Sarah signing papers in my dad's office with shaking hands. I thought about every time my mom had told me not to overreact, not to question, not to make trouble. For the first time, standing there in that dim lounge, in a wedding dress I had dreamed about since I was a girl, I realized something simple and devastating. My dad was not afraid for me. He was afraid of me, because I was the one person in his story who had stepped out of her assigned role. I took a breath and felt it settle all the way down into my stomach. I heard my own voice before I fully formed the words in my mind. I said I would not sign anything. I said it slowly, clearly, so there would be no misunderstanding. My heart pounded so hard, it almost drowned out the sound of my mom sucking in a quiet breath behind me. My dad stared at me as if I had spoken a language he had never heard. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the calm mask on his face cracked. Not completely, but enough for me to see the anger flash through. His eyes hardened. He reminded me that actions had consequences, that I was playing with fire I did not understand. I told him that I understood enough. The attorney began to speak again, but I barely heard him. The blood rushed in my ears. My hands were steady now, That surprised me more than anything. For 31 years, my body had flinched at every shift in my dad's tone. Now, standing across from him, I felt a strange stillness instead. Outside the door, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Voo, muffled but growing closer. The sound brushed against the edge of the moment like a match near dry paper. Something was about to ignite. I kept my eyes on my dad, waiting to see what he would do next. He did not look away from me. Not when the footsteps in the hallway drew closer. Not when the shadow of someone passing slipped across the bottom of the door. His eyes stayed locked on mine, steady and unblinking, as if he was daring me to flinch first. The attorney shifted in his seat, tapping one finger against the edge of the folder as if measuring the distance between safety and collapse. My mom pressed her hand to her chest. I could see the fluttering movement under her fingers, a quiet panic she did not know how to contain. She whispered my name softly, like it was a plea to keep the peace, but I did not look at her. My entire focus stayed on the man in front of me, the man who had shaped my life in ways I had only started to understand. The footsteps in the hallway stopped. A moment later, there was a soft knock on the door. My dad did not move, not even a twitch of his head. The attorney stood and walked to the door, opened it just a fraction, then turned back toward my dad with a tight expression. He said someone from the venue needed to speak with him. My dad held up a single finger, telling him silently to wait. I could feel something shift in the room, a tension that stretched thinner with every breath. My dad stepped closer to me, stopping so near that I could smell the faint trace of aftershave on his collar. He told me very quietly that I was making a mistake I would not be able to undo. His tone wrapped around me like the slow tightening of a rope, soft and controlled, but dangerous. I told him I had made my choice. My voice did not waver this time. I felt strangely steady, like I had finally found the center of something I had spent years circling. His jaw tightened. He lifted his hand just slightly, as if he meant to reach for my arm. But then he stopped himself. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something raw flicker behind them. Not anger, not disappointment. Something closer to disbelief. It was the look of a man who had never imagined losing control of the one person he always expected to obey. The soft knock on the door came again, louder this time. The attorney opened it wider, and the air from the hallway slipped into the lounge. I caught sight of one of the venue staff, a young woman holding a clipboard. She looked nervous when her eyes fell on me in my wedding dress. She said she had been told to deliver a message privately. The attorney stepped halfway into the hall to speak with her. My dad stayed where he was. He stared at me with a long, heavy silence. I felt a cold tremor run through me as he studied my face, as if he was memorizing the moment something inside me had changed. When the attorney returned, his expression had shifted. His brows were drawn tight. He leaned toward my dad and spoke in a low voice, barely audible. Something about a visitor at the gate. Something about a request to speak with security. My dad's eyes sharpened. He asked who it was. The attorney hesitated, then said it looked official. For the first time, my dad stepped back from me. He reached for the folder on the table and closed it with a soft thud. My mom lifted her eyes, confused. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind the staff member, her face pale again, her hands clenching the side of the doorframe. I took a slow breath. My pulse hammered, but a new awareness settled over me. This was it. The shift, the moment when everything he had kept in the shadows was beginning to move into the light. The attorney told him they should leave the lounge. My dad straightened his suit jacket, smoothed his tie, and looked at me with an expression I had only seen once before in my life. Not anger, not disappointment, calculation. A cold, assessing stare that said he was already rewriting the story in his mind, already choosing a path that would protect himself first. He stepped past me without another word. My mom followed him quickly, casting one last look at me before she slipped out. Sarah lingered a few seconds longer. Her eyes darted between me and the hallway. She whispered that she did not know what to do. I told her quietly that she did not have to choose right now. She nodded slowly, then followed after them. When the door closed behind them, The silence in the room expanded. I stood alone in my wedding dress, the soft fabric brushing my legs with every shallow breath I took. I felt suspended between two versions of myself, the girl who had learned to survive by folding inward, and the woman who now understood the weight of her own choices. A faint vibration pulsed against my hip. My phone again. I reached into the hidden pocket and pulled it out. A single message glowed on the screen. It was from Officer Daniels. He said they were at the venue. He said they needed to talk before anything else happened. He asked where I was. I typed that I was in the small lounge near the back hallway. Before I could hit send, a sharp burst of laughter drifted down the hall, followed by the clinking of glasses and the swell of music from the reception. The contrast of joy against the tension inside me made my stomach twist. I stepped out of the lounge with careful movements. The hallway felt longer now. The lights hummed softly overhead. At the far end, I saw Ethan walking toward me, weaving through a pair of bridesmaids who stopped him to hug him. He glanced up and saw me, his face breaking into a smile. A real warm smile that made something inside my chest loosen. But the moment he took a step toward me, someone else appeared from the corner near the staff entrance. Two men in suits. Not guests, not family. They moved with purpose, scanning the hallway until their eyes locked on me. Everything in me went still. One of them lifted a badge, holding it at chest level. I could not read the details from where I stood, but I recognized the shape of authority, the posture of someone carrying news that would change the room they walked into. Ethan looked between them and me, confusion spreading across his face. My breath caught. The man with the badge gave a small nod, acknowledging me. He started walking my way. Behind him, down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of my dad turning the corner, his shoulders tense and his head tilted slightly as he listened to someone at his side. The air felt thick, as if the entire building was holding a single breath. I stood very still, waiting to see who would reach me first. The man with the badge reached me first. I stood completely still as he stopped only a few feet away. The other man shifted behind him with the stillness of someone who had come, prepared for complications. Ethan was halfway down the hallway, slowed by guests who kept stopping him, and my dad was still several steps behind the officers. For a strange moment, I felt suspended in the middle of all of them. The past behind me. The future is walking toward me. The officer said my name in a steady voice. He explained that he was with the State Investigative Division and that they needed a private moment. I nodded. My knees felt wobbly, but I stayed upright. A part of me was aware of my veil brushing against my arm in a soft whisper. Another part of me counted each breath like I needed the rhythm to stay grounded. The hallway had gone quiet, except for music pulsing faintly from the reception area. The officer gestured toward a smaller storage room down the hall. I followed him inside. Ethan finally caught up and stepped in behind me, closing the door with a soft click. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and clean linens. My dad reached the threshold of the doorway just as the officer positioned himself in front of me. Dad tried to push his way in, but the second officer raised a hand to stop him. I saw the frustration burn in my dad's eyes as the door eased shut again. Inside the smaller room, the first officer spoke gently. He explained that the investigation had reached a new point, that there were documents and financial transfers linked to my dad's business that could no longer be ignored, and that they had reason to believe my dad might attempt to destroy evidence or pressure witnesses. As he said that last part, his eyes lifted to meet mine for a fraction of a second. He wanted to make sure I understood the weight behind his words. My heart thudded slowly. I felt the room tilt in a gentle sway, like the walls had loosened from their anchors. He asked if I was safe. I said I was. I told him that I had already been cooperating with detectives, and that my attorney had been expecting a follow-up. He nodded as if that confirmed something they already suspected. Then he said they were ready to take action. The door opened again. The second officer stepped aside. My dad was brought into view. His expression was a mask that refused to settle on one emotion. Anger flickered. Shock. A strange flash of disbelief, as if he had managed to avoid self-reflection for so long that reality itself stunned him. The first officer informed him that he was being detained for questioning regarding financial misconduct and identity misuse. He also said there was suspicion of attempted coercion of a family member. My dad's reaction was sharp. He stepped forward instinctively, as if to deny the entire situation with sheer presence, but the second officer placed a hand on his shoulder. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. I thought I would feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet bloom inside my chest, a recognition that this moment did not belong to me. It belonged to the truth. All I could do was stand there and witness the consequences unfold. My dad looked at me then. Not at the officers, not at Ethan. Only at me. His eyes held a question I had no way to answer. Maybe it was how you could do this. Or maybe it was, how did you know? Or maybe he was finally seeing me not as the daughter he could shape, but as a woman who had stepped out of the mold he built around me. Ethan moved closer to my side. His presence steadied me. The officers guided my dad down the hallway. The sound of their footsteps softened. Then it disappeared. The door of the smaller room closed again, leaving only me and Ethan and the hum of the distant music. I sank onto one of the wooden crates stacked against the wall. I felt the weight of everything press into me. The wedding dress, the expectations, the years of silence I had endured without even realizing how deeply I carried them. Ethan knelt in front of me. His hands rested lightly on my knees. He said he was with me, that he did not care about the disruption or the whispers that the guests would surely spread. He said I did what anyone with integrity would have done. His voice was steady, warm, and grounded, the kind of voice that could hold a person together when everything else felt ready to collapse. I leaned into that warmth for a long moment. I breathed in the scent of him and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I felt clearer. Not lighter exactly, but clear. A few minutes later, Sarah slipped into the room. She looked shaken, as if the entire morning had peeled away the last of the illusions she had clung to about our family. She sat beside me, careful of my dress. She whispered that Mom had started crying in the hallway after Dad was taken. Not dramatic crying. Silent crying, the kind that comes only when a person realizes a story they depended on longer holds together. Sarah did not reach for me. She did not apologize again. She just sat there, breathing beside me, letting the moment be exactly what it was. For the first time in our lives, we were two women sharing the same truth, rather than two daughters struggling to survive under the same roof. Eventually, we left the small room. The hallway buzzed with curious glances. A few distant relatives whispered, and then looked away quickly when I met their eyes. I held my head high. My steps felt strange in my wedding shoes, like each one was marking the beginning of something I had never dared imagine before. The reception paused when we walked in. The music changed to a lower murmur, and the guests turned in our direction. Ethan gently guided me to the center of the room. He lifted my hand and kissed it. He announced that our ceremony had been unexpectedly delayed, but that we would continue once we were ready. His voice carried through the room with calm control, steady and clear. I watched the tension in the guests' shoulders ease. The officiant approached us with a soft smile. She said we did not have to continue today. She added that there was no shame in pausing, but when I looked at Ethan, the world steadied again. I nodded. I told her I wanted to marry him. Today, right here, not despite what had happened, but because life had finally made room for honesty. The ceremony went on quietly. The vows felt powerful in their simplicity. I promised to choose the truth. He promised to hold space for every part of me. When we exchanged rings, the crowd exhaled. There was applause. I leaned into Ethan and felt something inside me break open. A gentle, grateful break. The night air outside the venue felt cool against my skin as I stepped onto the back patio. The lights from inside cast a soft, golden glow through the glass doors, and for a moment I stood with my hand on the railing, letting everything that had happened settle inside me. The wedding dress felt a little heavier than before, like it carried the weight of the day along with the delicate fabric. Guests were still talking in quiet clusters inside. Some kept glancing toward the hallway where my dad had been taken minutes earlier. Others avoided that part of the building entirely. The music had shifted to something slower, softer, an attempt by the band to pull people back into celebration. But the air held a different kind of charge now, a mix of disbelief and relief, and cautious curiosity. I looked down at the parking lot where the officers had led my dad. The space was empty now, except for a few parked cars, and the faint shimmer of red and blue lights fading into the distance. I felt no joy watching him leave, no sense of victory, only a deep, steady acceptance. What happened had been inevitable from the moment he tried to make my life fit inside his secrets. Ethan found me leaning on the railing. He stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I felt his warmth settle into the hollow places inside my chest. He asked softly if I needed a moment alone. I told him no. I needed to feel the presence of someone who understood that this day had turned into something none of us expected. When I turned around, his eyes were gentle. He was still in his suit, the tie slightly loosened, the top button undone. He looked like the safest place I had ever known. I rested my forehead against his chest and let myself breathe him in. He told me the guests were asking if we still wanted to have our first dance. I laughed a little. A tired laugh that felt like it came from someplace deep. I told him I did not know yet. We stood there together for a long moment. The wind moved through the nearby trees, rustling the leaves in a slow whisper. Inside, someone clinked a glass. A small applause followed, though I was not sure what for. The night felt like a fragile thing, still forming its shape. Sarah joined us on the patio. She moved quietly, her heels tapping softly against the stone. Her face was pale again, but her expression was clearer, as if the fog she had been trapped in all day had finally begun to lift. She told me Mom had been taken home by one of our cousins. She said Mom did not speak the entire drive to the front of the building. She only stared at the ground, holding her purse in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Sarah stepped closer to me. She told me she hoped I would let her explain someday. Not tonight. Not now. But someday. I nodded. That was all I had the energy to offer. She squeezed my arm lightly, then went back inside. Ethan tilted his head toward the reception room. He asked if I wanted to go back in. I exhaled slowly and told him yes. Whatever the night held next, I needed to walk into it as the woman I had become, not the girl I had been raised to be. We entered the room together. The lights glowed softly, and the guests turned toward us with cautious smiles. The bandleader asked if we were ready. Ethan looked at me. I gave a small nod. The music began, a slow melody that wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. When he pulled me into the dance, the world softened. My body sank against his, and my head rested on his shoulder. The guests melted into a blur of color and motion around us. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of the song and the equally steady beat of his heart against my cheek. During the dance, memories drifted in and out. The day I first suspected something was wrong. The night I found the truth. The moment Sarah looked at me during the wedding ceremony with fear in her eyes. The hallway. The officers. My dad turned as they led him away. And then, this moment, this warmth, this steady anchor I never thought I would have. When the song ended, Ethan kissed my forehead, and the room filled with soft applause. I felt a flush rise in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a quiet pride. I had faced everything that could have broken me, and here I was still standing. Not untouched, not unscarred, but whole. We spent the next hour talking with guests. Some offered condolences. Some offered awkward attempts at distraction, asking about the food, or complimenting the flowers. My Aunt Linda held my hands and told me I had done something brave. She said most people go their whole lives pretending not to see the truth, right in front of them. Her eyes glistened with something I did not fully understand but felt grateful for. As the night grew later, the guests trickled out one by one. A few stayed behind to help clean up. The staff began stacking chairs and gathering stray glasses. The soft glow of the string lights wrapped around the beams above us made everything feel gentler, like the universe was letting me land safely after the storm. Sarah returned and hugged me tightly. She held on longer than I expected. When she stepped back, she said she loved me. It was the first time in years that she had said it without an edge, without a hidden comparison, without fear. I pulled her into another hug. I told her we would figure things out in time. She nodded with tears in her eyes, then left with her husband. Finally, the room grew quiet again. Ethan and I stood together in the center of the empty reception hall. My wedding dress fanned around my feet, lightly wrinkled from the hours of movement. He traced his thumb gently along my hand, and the warmth of that simple touch made me want to cry in a way that felt like release rather than pain. He asked if I felt ready to leave. I told him I wanted one more minute, just one. I walked across the room to the side where the hallway met the back entrance. I looked down the long stretch of floor and thought about everything that had happened in that narrow space, the whispers, the threats. The truth is finally tearing its way out from the shadows. I felt no bitterness, only clarity. Ethan came to stand beside me. He slid his hand into mine and kissed the side of my head. I leaned into him and closed my eyes for a brief moment. When I opened them, the hallway looked different, smaller, less intimidating, as if it no longer held power over me. We gathered our things and stepped into the night air. The venue lights glimmered behind us as we walked toward the car. I lifted my dress slightly to avoid the gravel. The sky above was a deep, rich blue, and the stars scattered across it like tiny truths, refusing to be hidden. When we reached the car, I turned and looked at the building one last time. I felt the weight of everything that had happened today settle into place, not as a burden, as an ending and an opening. I took a slow breath and let it out. Now that the story has come to its end, I want to leave you with the same reminder I had to learn the hard way. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.